This week's parasha, which is Parashat Pinchas, is a pivotal parasha. It's the key in bridging Bnei Israel from the desert nation to preparing to enter Eretz Israel. For the past few weeks, the parashiot have been discussing and they've been working towards the penultimate moment of Bnei Israel's journey into Eretz Israel. The ultimate moment, of course, only comes in the book of Yoshua. The reason that Parashat Pinchas is so important is not just for the story at the beginning where Pinchas, the son of Elazar, spears to death Zimri, one of the princes of Israel, and Cosby, his Midianite partner. Rather, it's also the same parasha in which Bnei Israel are also given their allotted plots of land, as well as reminded of the different activities that we have to do during the Chagim, which are our national festivals, and I'll come back to that shortly. And these, of course, can only ultimately really be fulfilled properly in the land of Israel. So these series of events, the Pinchas story, the giving out of the land, and the Chagim, on the surface, they may seem to be a bit arbitrary and lacking in connection. They are actually completely interdependent and interwoven. For without one of these, there cannot be the others. Let's just go back one parasha to Parashat Balak. And there's a fascinating insight into what it is that Balak, the king of Moab, is afraid of. What he talks about suggests and is almost identical to that which Pharaoh spoke about 40 years earlier. What is that? He's nervous that this nation that he's seeing, Bnei Israel, will be atzum v'rav, great and large and strong, and therefore he's got to try and curse them in order to make sure not to be overtaken by them. It's the same thing that Pharaoh said, Hava nitchak malo, we need to be clever with them because they're going to overtake us. When one takes a moment to think, however, I just wonder whether if this is actually a critique of Balak and Pharaoh for assuming that Bnei Israel want to take over their lands, or is it actually a critique of Bnei Israel themselves, that they have in some way broadcast, even maybe by their body language, even by their behavior, their need and intention and desire to take over these foreign lands. The parallel in the stories is uncanny, and it speaks of the mindset of Bnei Israel at that time. Just as we had assimilated in Egypt before we became slaves, so too we started to assimilate with the Moabite and the Midianite women. The key is the mindset of the people and the goal that we have as a nation. What Pinchas is teaching us is that the killing of Zimri and Cosby is in fact the fight against the Jewish people thinking that we are like the rest of the nations, that we can assimilate and conquer and still keep our Jewish identity. There was no way for us to get our allotted plots of land in Israel until we made the switch in mindset that there will be no cohabiting with Moab or Midian. We needed to understand that the wars that we won were to advance towards Eretz Israel, our one and only home, and not to occupy and conquer other lands and nations. It's not an issue of capability. We were capable. We were not slaves in Egypt because we were weak. We were slaves in Egypt because we were strong, but we forgot our way. We believed we could be more Egyptian than the Egyptians. We believed we could assimilate into their culture and their social networks. The Pinchas event is a crucial and monumental, pivotal point in Jewish history. We are at a fork in the road here. One direction is immediate satisfaction. We're winning wars, we're wealthy, we're successful as a nation in the desert. Other nations are scared of us, they revere us. We know that from Az Yashir Moshe. In today's terms, we are a unique, young startup nation which can conquer the desert, make the desert bloom, and all the nations around want to be part of it. Or we can continue on our ultimate quest, which is to get to Eretz Israel and live out the dream of our nation as given to us by the Torah. We can see this struggle throughout our journey from even before the times we were slaves in Egypt. From the time of Abraham, who was the first to get stuck in Egypt until Hashem kicked him out. And even until eventually we entered the land, There were those tribes that wanted to stay back in the Jordan Valley, didn't even want to go in. We constantly struggle with what it is that is our ultimate goal. Egypt, Moab, Midian, they're all nations in culture and style that exist through to the modern day, just the names change. For these ancient nations, we can substitute modern nations, America, England, Germany, France. We are consistently and constantly attracted to their way of life, their style, and their culture. We want their women and their dress style. We want their food and their fun. It's a draw and an attraction which we've had to deal with and will continue to be challenged by probably for all of time. And this is why Parashat Pinchas is so important. It teaches us the ways to beat the addiction, which is outside culture, and so to be proud and focused on us living and thriving in our own land with our own culture, the culture of Eretz Yisrael and Torah Yisrael. And how do we do that? Firstly, we must recognize the cancer of assimilation. Secondly, we must prepare and execute a plan to be in Israel and to continue to be in Israel, settling the land, mapping out the divinely allotted plots of land as spoken about in our parasha, creating a just legal system and practicing social justice. And thirdly, we must celebrate our ways, our holidays, our Yomim Tovim in a way which is unique to our people and our land, and not take on other people's Yomim Tovim. We have our own, and we have no need for outside festivals. With these three things, all of which appear in our parasha, we can overcome the obstacles of the outside world pressure and mature into the nation that we are destined to be, an Or LaGoyim, a light unto the nations. This is a struggle and a challenge which may well exist for eternity, but the effort involved in trying to overcome these forces, that's what brings about true nationhood and unity. The effort involved, something which is rare and yet beautiful. Nevertheless, even if we don't manage to get there fully, we have to make our effort in every generation to do that, to overcome the things that are going to stop us from being a true nation and to fulfill our potential as Am Yisrael, Be'eretz Yisrael, Im Torat Yisrael. Shabbat Shalom U'Mevorach.